As he's getting sick, is he allowed to still be an elder? Is he allowed to be giving sermons or whatever you call it?
At some point that stopped. At some point that stopped because he didn't want to go. And so I didn't know that though. See, nobody said anything.
Right. Wow.
So he just slowly stopped going to meetings, didn't feel good.
Wow.
And then, of course, when the diagnosis came out, then they tried to bring him to meeting because they thought maybe he would enjoy it. And he didn't want to leave the house. Right. And it was a very different Carlin from that point on. And I saw things with him. Our whole game during COVID, I lived right by them in my IOP center was very close to Connie's house. So if something went down, she would call me and I'd rush over there because we were trying to keep him out of the psych ward because at that time, Carlin wasn't cognizant enough to be able to use a cell phone or call out. Mm-hmm. So if he fucked up, like for the 3 weeks he was in there, they had no communication. And we were all afraid he would die in there by himself because they weren't let people visit, you know. So it became kind of our secret mission just to keep him out of the psych ward. And so I would be called, and I got very, very close to Connie. She gave me all of his medical paperwork, and I got to review it with my doctor, who really was helpful in helping me understand FTD and the differences between with FTD. It appears as though, like with Alzheimer's and dementia, the brain dies off. This little piece is just atrophy off. So like one day I know you, the next day I don't, because that might be the piece that died. Erased. Well, in this disease, it appears to kind of start atrophying at the edges of the brain. And then, of course, ultimately death. Right. And they give the expectancy about seven years. So who knows how long Carlin actually had it. Right. But I was over there one day, and we were trying to get him to the doctor, and he wouldn't go. And Connie called me and said, "Can you help?" And I buzzed over there. And now, bear in mind, this man weighed about 100 pounds. And
wow.
She's like, "Carlin, you need to go. We don't want you to go back to the hospital. So we need to go talk to this doctor." And he looked at her and he goes, "I'm going to hurt you." And like at the time, like I almost laughed because I was like, I can thump you and knock you over.
You're so little. Yeah.
You know, after the way it turned out. So I wondered, in hindsight, looking back, how many of those times happened for poor Connie, and she didn't talk about it. And she's trained well, you know, to protect him. And he was kind of status quo there for a couple of years, and he didn't mind one-on-one people coming over, but he didn't like crowds. Mm-hmm. And so a year ago Thanksgiving, like 2 years this Thanksgiving, the kids were going to go to their in-laws' houses, and Connie had invited me and Tate, myself, and my younger brother, who lives out here in Texas. So she just wanted to try out a small get-together and see if that worked for Carlin. And, you know, we'd been planning that for a week, and my brother came in from town, and Tate came in from Florida. And that day, Darren, my brother, he had his 7-year-old twins with him. And my brother, Darren, is not in the truth. He's in AA. So it's kind of like the truth. Just a matter of fact.
Healthier version.
There's some hypocrisy in there too, but I do love AA better than the truth. But anyway, he drove straight to their house, and I get a call from him. I'm in my hotel, and Tate's in the hotel, and we get a call, and he's like, "They're not answering." And I said, "You know what? She may be showering him. You know, she may be helping him shower." And I said, "Just ring the bell again." And so he rings the bell again and goes around, tries the doors, and then he calls me and he says, "I'm coming to get you," which is always, by the way, with any of my brother's siblings, it's always go get Tammy.
Yeah.
If there's something going down, go get Tammy.
Right.
The one you want in a crisis, you know. So anyway, Tate looked at me and he said, "Mom, this is going to be bad." And I said, "No, it's not. I don't think so. I don't feel that." And he's like, "Mom, it's going to be bad. I'm just telling you." He goes, "You don't think Carlin would do something, do you?" And I'm like, "No." And honest to God, this is what I thought. Remember the Mexican tourist deaths with the carbon monoxide? They'd had several of them. They had like just random people dying at, you know, some reason that flashed in my head. I knew somebody would be dead,
Right.
but it just turned on their heater, and for some reason I just talked myself into believing that it was going to be carbon monoxide.
Wow.
And I called PD and I asked them, and by the way, Albuquerque PD mocks itself off everything California does. You just move from one blue state to the other. So cops are not cops in Albuquerque anymore.
Great.
And
Breaking Bad makes me think of that.
it's so bad. I mean, it's not a good time to be a cop. But so I call PD and say, look, I need a welfare check. Please come do a welfare check. And they won't come. And they literally, I was on the phone with them for 45 minutes and they literally said, yeah, we don't want to risk our officers' lives. Okay. And I'm like, my brother has a mental illness. Right. We need to get in the house. We've been planning this. We haven't had contact since 5:30. We have our phones. It's like the last time somebody heard 5:30 the night before. And so we take the door off the hinges and go in. And not a single smell of Thanksgiving. You know how you walk in and you can smell turkey and all the sage, all the silent, deathly quiet. And they had this beautiful, very, very nice home. And Tate, my brother, thank God he left the twins in the car. He goes off. They go kind of over by the kitchen, and me, always on a mission, I beeline it right for. I'm going to get to the bottom of it and get this problem solved, as it were. And I go straight to the master bedroom and I open up the door, and my sister-in-law's head is at my feet. And I'm like, and then I look over and there's an arm, and I don't know what I can't quite take it in. Yeah. Taylor said him and Darren heard me say 3 times, almost like I was speaking to a dog. No. I do not remember saying that. I don't know how long I was there. I was just looking at this. And there was everywhere. And she was in pieces and disemboweled. And and so the bed is right there. I didn't even see him. I guess when he had disemboweled her, the knife had slipped and cut his groin. Wow. And he had started bleeding out. And then he also had cut his own neck. And he had fallen back on the bed. So he's laying on the bed. I don't even see him. I'm just standing there, like, trying to figure out what I'm seeing. And all of a sudden, he sits up on the bed. And as God is my witness, it was a demon. Wow. He sat up, and we locked eyes. And I went, and I just real slowly, never leaving his eyes, backed out, shut the door, and went, get out. And of course, the whole thing unfolded. And
did he stay in the room? What?
Well, the cops came, and by now they decided to come, of course, because they're on the phone, and they're like, because when I came out, all I could say is, I think he dismembered her.
Jesus.
I just kept repeating that because I was just, and I don't shake, and I was shaking. I just couldn't even wrap myself around what imagine.
That's such a horror.
So then I felt like, so now we have the SWAT team. We got the whole area cordoned off. The helicopters are flying. The news is out. Nancy Grace is calling. Dateline's calling. It's a nightmare. And Tate and I moved across the street. They had us all back. And I felt like the cops might shoot him when he came out. I kept telling him, look, he weighs like 90 pounds. He's in there by himself. I mean, I can go in and get him if you guys are scared to. I mean, go in there and get him. Like, what are we waiting? I mean, they were flying drones and stuff. I'm like, oh, for God's sakes.
Right.
I guess from their vantage point, it was a homicidal maniac.
For sure.
But, anyway, we were watching when they finally got him out. He was completely naked, and he was covered in blood from here down. He looked like Peter on it. And he was so not my brother that Tate and I looked at each other and we went, somebody else did it. It's not Carlin.
Oh, wow.
And they took him down to the ground. And in that movement, it's almost like he kind of almost morphed back into Carlin. Like when he came out, he was smaller. Like he didn't look like, it was just really weird. Like, and I thought, moment in time that I was the only one that had seen that, and and Tate was the same way. Like we both had like this instantaneous, oh, it's not Carlin. And then when they took him down and he turned his head, I saw his face again, and I could see the blueness of his eyes, and I'm like, oh no, it is. Oh, he did do that. This is not good. So they take him to the hospital and save his life, and he has these big stitches up his neck, and
wow.
And they have him at UNMH, and they have him shackled to the bed with a cop posted up because he's a murderer.
Yeah.
And so I guess he wasn't. He didn't want to take meds, and he was refusing to eat. So the officers called me and asked. The lieutenant called and asked if I would come down and sit with him. And they didn't want his kids because they felt, that they might be emotionally compromised and maybe kill him or help him commit suicide. And which, of course, they would. They're lovely, lovely kids. And I mean,
Were they home for that whole thing?
They could be worried that they're going to be next.
Oh, okay.
They were both. They're both. Dylan just graduated law school, and he was with his wife in San Diego, and then their daughter Lisa was with her husband, and so that's why it was just this real small. And I'm so grateful that I went in and not them. Can you imagine?
Right.
So I said to the cops, I called to see, does anybody want to go down and sit with them? They want him to eat, and nobody would go. Which, again, from a Christian standpoint, wouldn't you want to go pray over him? Mm-hmm. I don't know. Only one. I went and sat beside him every day. Not one person from the truth went to see him.
No one asked. Yeah. How did the cult deal with that?
They just said it's not him. He died a long time ago. It's not him. And I'm like, well, who is it then? So are we saying that we believe in demons now? Oh no, it's just the mental illness. And I'd be like, well, what is mental illness? I mean, I know a lot about mental illness, but
right.
I know a lot of mentally ill people that don't chop up and dismember their wives.
For sure.
Anyway, but I was happy too, because I wanted somebody who loved God to be there, and I wanted to tell him that he was forgiven. It was really important to me. Wow. So went and sat with him every day until he died, and he wouldn't take their meds. They did give him meds. They gave him pain meds, and we had to fight for the DNR to be the living will to be honored, because the cops had decided that they wanted to make a case. And the thing is, with this disease, when you're talking to him, he seems really rational. So they thought he might be playing crazy. And he told them exactly what he did and why he did it. And he told me the same thing. And he would come in and out of Looneyville. And when the demon was there, he was clear and concise. His eyes were black, and he would talk about the murder. And he said that he had been planning it for 10 years.
Wow.
That's when my mom died.
Wow.
I don't believe he was planning it for 10 years. I believe the mental illness started then, or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. Because that day when he flicked the will at me, his eyes were different.
Right.
That day. I remember, and I'd seen that lightly a couple of other times.
Sheesh.
And I remember thinking to myself at the time, like, who are you? Like, where's my brother, and what have you done with him? But then some of my conversations with him would just be typical Alzheimer-y. Like, he would start talking sexually, or, would you stick your finger or whatever? And I'd be like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then, but he would always preface it with, that's not a very Christian thing. Then he brings up the money, and he literally tells me that he took my money. And by the way, I would sit and record our conversations because he would talk real fast. We're Italian anyway, so we all talk fast, but I would think to myself, I'll never remember this. And I wasn't supposed to be asking him anything about the murder, but the cops after the first day just left us alone.
Right.
And so every day I would go in and I would say, do you know where you are? And he would say, yes. And I'd say, where are you? And he'd say, the hospital. Do you know why you're here? And he'd say, yes. And why are you here? And he'd be like a sheepish little boy, and he'd be like, because I hurt everybody. And I'm like, who specifically did you hurt? And he would say, Connie. So when it was Carlin, that's the mental disease part. That was just him talking. Mm-hmm. But then like morph into like just all of a sudden his voice would change and he would start talking about the actual murders and why he did it, or he would talk about killing in general or swords. Like he did this with a very small knife that he had managed to hide somewhere.
Wow.
And he's that day he woke up and he said, "Today's the day." And he got up before Connie and he went in. Oh, let me just back up real quick. So I learned this later that about 3 months before the murder, they got a new brain doc. And that doc, for whatever reasons, decided to take him off as the one med. And he said, I think he'll have a better quality of life and not be so like drugged up, kind of like the Thorazine shuffle, if different type of med. And I learned from his daughter later that Connie, in the next couple of weeks, had started to see the old behaviors coming back. And I said, like what? And she said that he like repetitively would get up and go stand in front of a mirror and say, "Get out, get out."
Wow.
And then he would down and then he would go up. And so I didn't know any of that. Like, I grieve for Connie because she loved him and that's what killed her. You know what I mean? She didn't think he would ever hurt her. She thought she could handle him. And you can't handle, people that have that kind of demonic evil lurking around. And he said that, so he got up that day and he went in the bathroom and he said he wanted, these are his words. And this is where my year and a half with Tate of trying to figure out what is the devil and what are demons and what does the Bible say and how does this apply to this thing I grew up in and why and how, because it makes it, but the verbiage, I keep hearing the same verbiage. So he said, I wanted to create as much suffering as possible. He planned on killing us all. So he walked over where she sleep in bed and he slit her throat and said, she fought like the Dickens, but I did a number on her.
Wow.
And he kind of leaned forward when he said it.
Wow.
And you're like, and then he said he felt like he ought to suffer a little too. So he nicked his neck.
Sheesh. Tammy, real quick, it's 7. Do we have a caller?
We have one caller.
Tammy, would you mind? Typically, we would end it here because we're an hour and a half in. But would you mind sticking around while we take a caller and then we continue from here? Because I still want to talk about the FBI investigation and where you're at now. And I feel like we still have more to talk about. So if you don't mind, we're gonna
little intermission.
We'll do a little call.
Sort of.
We'll take a call real quick, and we'll come back to you.
Okay, do I have time to go wash my hands?
Oh, yeah.
course.
Yeah, if you want to mute, you can mute yourself on your end and just listen for us when we come back.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's do that because I want to hear. We have more to cover.
Let's go. Oh, King. I don't know. A king is coming.
The king. Uh-oh. Are you
with
there?
us, King?
Mute yourself on your end. And,
It's from.
He's low.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh,
I
you
couldn't
are?
hear you.
What-
Man, I've been like hypnotized by this episode.
I know, it's insane.
My story's gonna pale in comparison. Such a strong woman.
Oh man, this is wild. But I know you've been waiting, and I don't want to keep.
No,
you,
I don't mind at all. Honestly, if you want to let her keep talking, I can call back another time.
No,
this
man.
this
No.
is far more important. My
I think-
story's gonna pale in
let's-
comparison.
Well, it'd be good to take a little breather because that.
It's gonna.
Yeah, working up to that, the murder is just it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we could all just take like a few minutes to decompress
Yeah.
from that insane scene that Tammy went through. But
No, I gotta say, man, this has been the best episode for
Oh,
sure.
That's all, man.
It's my
Thank
welcome
you.
back episode.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Tammy. Yeah, I knew immediately once I got her email that she was gonna have a very special, alarming, haunting, crazy story. So yeah, I'm glad you're here to share your story because your email was also interesting to me. So yeah, take your time. Tell us what you've got, what you went through.
Well, first of all, I want to say it's strange because the TAMI is a very
Are you talking to me?
unique way to spell that, and my wife's name is that as well. So it's really crazy for me. I feel like sort of a connection.
Right, that's weird. That's weird. And Tammy, if you can hear us, sorry, Tammy, we are still talking to the caller. We'll be back, and just listen for us. But that's a weird thing. So yeah, take it away.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, basically, it's a out of body experience in my story. But I don't know if you can like categorize that as like astral projection. But I guess any like soul movement outside of the body is that.
Could be, yeah.
But I used to explain my experiences as dreams, so I didn't go crazy, and then and it was easier for me to make others understand if I had to tell the story just to get it off my chest.
Right.
So I tell them it was a crazy dream, but these dreams are always very real and very visceral because like how dreams are kind of usually just fragmented and they kind of disappear over time, and you have little puzzle pieces, but it's not like a complete story.
Absolutely.
But these ones. Like I said, they're visceral, and they're always the outcomes of like abduction experiences that I've kind of put together over the time. From who I don't know and why is just as big a mystery as well. But I'll start with this one. I was laying down in bed to go to bed. I'd usually get in late from work, and my wife and kids were fast asleep. So I crept into bed, this night to not wake anyone up. But as soon as I lay down, I felt like I was sucked up to the ceiling. The next thing I remember, I was in a round powder blue room, what looked like bubbles just moving inside the walls, which is kind of weird to me.
Yeah. And
I was on a white solid table, but unable to move anything but my head and neck area and eyes. Those are the only parts I can move. I looked around kind of the best I could to try and figure out what the hell was happening. As I was doing that, a figure walked up behind me and then gently placed the palms of each of their hands on each side of my head and ears, and I immediately calmed down. And I heard a voice say, "Just relax, you won't be harmed. In fact, you earned a trip." And I was like, "What?" And then the next thing I know, another humanoid, but he was huge. I mean, 8 feet, maybe even taller, and just appeared, walked above to the end of the table I was on, bent over. And I'm guessing their feet were planted on the floor because it looked like they were just standing over me, but they were massive. I couldn't make out any faces, but the one standing over me pointed at my chest and started to swirl their index finger in a clockwise motion. And suddenly what looked like milk started to rise out of my chest and resembled Milky Way galaxy or some sort of spiral in ancient art you see on pictographs and things like that.
Right.
And then the next thing I knew, I was just floating above my house, and the voice again said to look at myself and try to fly around. All I had to do was think about which direction and how fast, and it would happen. Well, I first looked down at myself, my body, and I could see I still had all the parts, but they were translucent, kind of color blue, like a Force ghost in Star Wars is the best way I can explain it. I remember thinking, well, that's weird, but then I thought maybe I should go check out the park and just immediately floated towards it because I have a park near my house. The voice said, "That's good, but don't you want to look at something you've never seen?" And I was like, "Sure," in my head. And then the voice said, "Check out the top of the earth, head towards the moon." I was like, "Okay," because it was in the middle of the night and it was a full moon that night. So I kind of snickered and I was like, "Yeah, right." And I thought about it and started rocketing towards the moon, straight up.
Wow.
I zipped through the clouds and got where space would start, and I suddenly hit a barrier, like a glass or thick plastic dome, and made a hollow plastic sound and a cartoonish wooden road sign that would be in a Looney Tunes show, and it just appeared in front of me, and in my head I heard "Verboten," which means forbidden in German. I don't know why I heard that, but I heard that one. But then the voice that I was hearing, it told me I wasn't allowed to leave unless I was tethered to a guide with access. So a little iron ring appeared on the right ankle because I looked down and felt it. And he said, "You can head to the moon now." And I was like, "Okay." And I went really slow so I wouldn't hit my head again. And as soon as we cleared the barrier that I thought I was going to hit again, I felt almost an intense warmth and the strongest feeling of love and content that I'd ever felt. And suddenly I was aware of so many things that were mysteries that I was like, wow, I know that, but I would never be aware of normally. And of course I don't remember any of it now because once I was returned, they said I wouldn't remember it anyway. The voice also in my head said, "Head to the moon," so I did. And it looked like all the images we were familiar with craters and gray rocky surface from like the distance. But when I entered the moon's atmosphere, the sky turned to like a saffron color. And there was like tall green grass and rolling hills as far as I could see. It was super windy. And the currents like from the wind carried me all over the surface. And it was like an exhilarating roller coaster ride, really. I was like having fun. After a bit, I got yanked up by a guide, whoever the voice was. And it said to orient myself and feel the earth with my hands. Again, I was like, what? And I said, okay. And then the voice said, think about it. And when I did, my ether body, or whatever it was, it grew to the size of Galactus from like the Silver Surfer comics.
Of course.
And I can fit Earth in both hands. And it felt like mossy, moist, and it vibrated with life. It was like really weird, but I just knew it.
Wow.
And then the next thing I know, we're hovering over the planet Mars. He like zipped us over there. And the voice said, feel it. And again, I did with my hands, and it felt like a fragile, sharp, like volcanic rock. But it did vibrate with life. But it was like this feeling inside, like made me think it was inside, deep in the planet. Like there was like things hiding inside of it. And then the next time, like right after that, the guide grabbed my hand, and we were floating above Jupiter. It was like a flash. And again, the voice said, try to touch the planet. And I started to reach out again, but suddenly, like, I had the most terrifying fear. I was frozen and couldn't do it, no matter how hard I tried to finally. I finally decided I didn't want to. I was like, you know what, this is not a good idea. And then the guide said, interesting. Like those like totally stood out. I was like, interesting. Well, I'll see you later. And I zipped. And then suddenly I just like zipped all the way back to Earth. And I could see my house getting closer and closer and closer. And then somehow I was able to see my bed through the roof. Or my body through the roof, sorry. And I slammed back to my body. So instead of like falling asleep, I fell awake.
Wow.
I sat up, looked around, and then next thing I knew, I blacked out. And then the morning happened.
That's
Weird.
wild.
And that was it.
That's wild. It's odd that because I think we talked maybe yesterday or the day before, and you mentioned the astral projection bit, and that had been in my mind because I started the show tonight talking about the guy who survived that cult, right?
Yeah. That's why I was like, wow.
Before he started that cult, before he went into that cult and I started it, he was lost in an astral projection. He would tell me, like, he was in college, and he would talk about being visited by someone who kind of like what you're saying, a guide, but he thought the guide was his friend, and he would go astral project there all the time and be in this place. Kind of sounds similar to you because it's like cosmic and, especially that like the rolling hills type thing. So after doing that for so long, some other voice, according to him, came from behind his shoulder and said, you've been talking to the devil. And that the person he thought was his friend who wanted to keep him there, according to his other voice, was the devil. And that was the last time he did that. And then he joined a cult.
Well, the devil is Kings and Rainbows.
Yeah, that's weird that when I saw the astral projection thing, I had been thinking about the cult episode and thinking about that guy. So
You got a cult on your mouth.
that's a
Yeah,
really
I'm never going to
wild-
start a cult, so I'm going to promise you that.
Yeah, stay far away.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But that's a wild story, man. I appreciate you sharing it, and I know you had some. other
I
ones.
just wish it was on a different episode. I feel kind of bad.
No.
Don't feel
It's great, man. I'm really glad we got to hear from you. I know you have other ones, so keep in touch, and we'll have you back so we can hear some more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll let you know if I'm available whenever I am. I do have a lot of other stories, and they're not similar, but they're just as weird.
Yeah, well, perfect. This is the place we want to hear them. So we'll have a good night, man. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
Yeah. Take care, man. Thank you.